as we've been talking about last night's public hearing that lasted about 5.5 hours. It was a long night for council members and all the folks who went to City Hall to talk about the proposed budget. And joining us now to talk more about it is Council Member Stephanie Reed. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, you sound mighty chipper for somebody who had a long night last night. That was quite a public hearing.
It was quite a public hearing, yes.
So the point of last night, as I understand it, was just for you all to hear from the residents, right? You all didn't conduct or not conducting any business afterward. Is that right?
There was not supposed to be any business conducted, correct. That's why the public hearing is just hearing from the public, hearing their thoughts on the three items that were on the agenda, and that was supposed to be all that was intended to happen.
So, what people were talking to you all about last night was the proposed budget. I know there were 3 separate public hearings, but it was all kind of, together. The 89-cent rate per $100 of assessed value, which for a lot of folks whose assessments went up, whose home assessments went up, and they, on average, the residential assessments went up by 20% in Lynchburg. If you leave it at 89 cents, this would amount to a tax increase. The budget does include things like $60 million over 3 years for school buildings, money to renovate the Lynchburg Public Library, money to repair the Miller Park Pool, a salary increase for teachers. What were you hearing last night?
Well, I'm going to guess that you and Brian, probably because it was so late, have not had a chance to listen to the full 5 hours. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
well,
probably.
We did, but we didn't listen to the 5 hours, but we listened to the very end, and we want to get to that. Yeah, we want to get to what happened. But just
let me recap just the very beginning, because it's very important. Because the first 2 hours was when everybody was talking about the first agenda item, which was the tax rate. And so we listened to everyone speak, and at the end of that 2 hours, a motion was made to set the tax rate, which, again, we weren't supposed to be doing any business last night. And a motion was made by Councilman Misjuns to set the rate at 76 cents, and it was seconded by Councilman Timmer. What then the concern and the issue became that we wanted to, and the mayor was talking about this, about letting the rest of the hearings happen, because we had more people in the chamber that had signed up to speak. That the third item on the agenda last night was to talk about the budget as a whole. Councilman Misjuns then made a comment about, well, we've heard from 49 people tonight. We feel like we've heard from the people, and it's been very clear what their voice has what their opinion is, which is that they want lower taxes. And so later on in the evening, someone said towards the end of the night that was kind of an ironic comment, because during the Wigington Road debacle, we heard from 300 people who didn't want that project, and yet they were ignored. So I thought that was a very fair point. And as you guys also know, we have almost 80,000 citizens in the city, and I made the comment that while the 49 people that did speak earlier in the evening were important, we also have over 79,000 voices that were not heard, and we have to make sure that we are considering everyone. I think loud and clear, Mary and Brian, what we did here was the most of the people that were most concerned about the assessments going up and the consequences from that were the retired community on the fixed incomes. And what we weren't able to speak to, because we're not supposed to speak, is that is addressed in this budget. Councilman Feraldi made a point, I believe at the joint school meeting, about addressing and asking our city manager to address the senior disabled tax relief program that we currently have and expanding the parameters of that, which is done in this budget, so that people that qualify will actually not have to pay their taxes on their homes if they fall into that category. And I understood those concerns. We've heard those concerns from that same group of people for the last 2 years that I've been on council, and I understand it is a real fear and concern. And so I feel for them, and we are addressing that. You heard less of that concern from the younger people in the audience. That as a whole, the younger families were more concerned about making sure that the schools were funded, that the programs and the resources in the city that are for family things, that those did have the funds behind them. So earlier in the night, you had more of the retirees and fixed income groups, I would say the majority. And then later in the night, when we talked about the budget as a whole, it was people that were really more focused on the children and family issues. So they were more supportive of leaving the tax rate where it was. But in the middle of the night, we ended up having an hour that was debated on whether we should be discussing and voting on a rate at all, which really was not supposed to be done last night.
So at the end of, and then at the very end, Councilman Misjuns said that, you all are going to have the first reading of the budget on May 13th, and you haven't set the tax rate.
Correct. And what Councilman Feraldi brought up, which was a very good point, we've been discussing this budget for over a month. And the point of these work sessions and email correspondence would have been, because it's been no secret that the equalized rate has been discussed by council members, would have been for them to have either brought up during a work session or during some correspondence, hey, City Manager Benda, what would our budget look like now if we were to have a 76-cent rate, if we were to equalize, so that we could all have had that discussion prior to last night? We've seen the budget calendar. We've known that May 13th was the date that tentatively was going to be when we adopted a budget. So why that was brought up last night, why that was made into this huge deal as if it was a shock to everybody, I don't know. We knew that last night was not supposed to be the night that we voted on a rate because it was a public hearing. That was not on the agenda. That's not the time to do it. And to make it this huge production was unnecessary. And we've had all this time up until last night to say, show us what a budget at 76 cents would look like for the public to see as well, because that could have been something the public could have said last night. Hey, we've seen what the budget at 76 looks like. We've seen the budget at 89, which was the original proposed. We don't like this, we don't like that, or we think we would like it to be something in the middle, because now we know what the consequence of going at to 76 would look like. We know that the schools would lose a lot of funding. We know that services may be cut. That would have been great for all of us to know. So now what we are proposing, what the discussion was, we might need to adjust some of the dates so that now we can have an additional work session to now look at what that would do. We need to see what 76 would look like and see how the budget would change before we can vote on a rate. Because I mentioned 2 years ago when we voted on the rate, before we had the discussion, if everybody wants to remember, we then had to scramble, try to keep that public safety package together that was the best public safety package our city's ever seen. And we were able to keep it together. But because we voted on the rate first, in order to keep that public safety package together, we ended up almost having to cut city services and jobs. And in order not to do that, we ended up, the schools ended up getting levelized funding at the local level. At the local level, we got increased funding from the state, but at the local level, we ended up going levelized to 2022. That's what Councilman Helgeson ended up proposing we do in order to make our budget work at the 22-cent tax cut that we ended up voting on that year. So when you vote first and then have to scramble to make it work for the number that you pick, it's not the best way to do it. So we should have had that discussion then, and that's what we're proposing now. And we've had time to do that, and it wasn't done. So, that was the frustration last night. So we can make adjustments in our calendar. We just need to do the right thing by the citizens and have the full discussion of what the effects will be now by changing these numbers.
So what you're saying is that nobody ever directed the city manager to present a budget with the 76-cent rate?
Not that I've seen. I have not seen any correspondence, and none of our work sessions has anybody said, we'd like to see what 76 looks like.
So you would go in then on, conceivably, the way that the calendar is now, on May 13th and have the first reading of the budget it would have to be, I mean, if the budget is presented at the 89-cent rate, so it would be the budget at the 89-cent rate, right?
Correct, because no one up until now has asked anything different at any of the previous sessions to have any other rate, any other budget presented. And then all of a sudden last night, the motion was made to go to 76 when there's been no alternative budget presented for us to look at, which should have been done prior to last night if that was something we were going to consider. You don't just motion in the middle of a public hearing to change the rate when none of us have seen what that budget's going to look like. So that's why there's been no change to the budget calendar, because, as far as our city manager and the staff is concerned, there hasn't been an appetite by the majority of council to make an adjustment. So, that's no fault of the city staff if you haven't had a majority of council up until last night, anyone say, hey, we want to change the rate. So that's why there's been no change. That's not to say that that can't be done, but to demand it last night out of nowhere in the middle of the public hearing, this wasn't the time to do it. We do have time to have the discussion now and just shift some dates forward or add some meetings, but it wasn't supposed to be done in the middle of the public hearing.
So I'm looking at the meeting schedule for City Council, and next one is May 13th. So there's 3 weeks instead of 2 between the meetings. I mean, you all can just have a special called meeting and discuss this, can you not? Is that all it takes?
We can, and there was a tentative work session scheduled for May 6th, which we did discuss last night, so we can add that meeting back in. That meeting could be now our city manager we could add that meeting back in, and he could present what a budget would look like at 76, and we could talk through. And I think that's important for everybody to see what's coming off the table now. What is our budget going to look like at 76? And then we could talk through that. And if we needed to add a special meeting in between the 6th and the 13th to then have a actual business meeting where we can vote, because typically our work sessions aren't voting meetings unless we suspend the rules of procedure, we can do that as well. But we have to make sure that we've had time to discuss what the different rates. If 76 is too low because all of a sudden we can't give the money to the schools, that everybody, including Councilman Misjuns and Councilman Taylor, Councilwoman Timmer, have said that they maybe we need to go up.
Well, this amounts to, if it stays at 89 cents and we're kind of running out of time, to lower it. It amounts to a pretty big tax increase for a lot of folks. And you and Larry Taylor and Councilman Taylor, Mayor Taylor, Councilman Misjuns ran on lowering taxes for Lynchburg. Are you okay with the 89-cent rate?
So, first of all, we ran on public safety, we ran on education, and we ran on the economy. On our 2 years ago, we gave, like I said, the greatest public safety package this city has ever seen, and it has resulted in great things for our first responder and law enforcement community. We had lowered the tax rate 22 cents that first year. But since then, we have done levelized funding at the local level 2 years in a row for our schools. We have yet to deliver on education. And so we have in this budget, again, like I said, we're addressing the tax relief for our senior disabled, who are the most vulnerable from the standpoint they're not working anymore. They're not getting any more income. So these increases affect that community the most because they are on a very strict budget. So we are absolutely following through on addressing the needs and tax relief for a vulnerable community. When you have limited money to work with every year, you can't give it to every group that you have made promises to. We have to address it as we can, and we have yet to follow through on delivering to the schools. We have over $100 million of needs at our schools that are just infrastructure, building needs, structural needs, HVAC. We have the track and EC class. I mean, the list goes on to just the neglect of maintenance of those schools and along with helping to try to retain and attract teachers so our kids can get the best education by the best educators.
Councilwoman
Reed,
Reed,
delivered on our promises.
If I might, we're just about out of time here. I'm not to put too fine a point on it, but that sounds like yes, you would vote to keep the rate where it is.
And I haven't seen. Listen, I want to find out how we can deliver on our promise to the school system. If we can bring our rate down, absolutely, I want to deliver that. Absolutely. But I want to make sure that I deliver on that third promise, which we haven't been able to do yet. So that's why I want to have this discussion. Where can we go to make things less burdensome for our citizens? Because that is very important, but also deliver that third promise that we have yet to do. If we can do that, I would love to see it.
All right, we'll leave it there. Lynchburg City Councilwoman Stephanie Reed, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day.